Her daughter called her free childcare. Patricia Langston, retired teacher and widow, didn't argue. Megan laughed, dropping off the twins she never thanked her mother for raising. By morning, Patricia had logged every hour, every meal, every diaper, and printed an invoice that ended the illusion. She'd spent a lifetime giving her time away for love. Now she was billing for it and rewriting what family duty really costs. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Patricia Langston stood at her kitchen sink, back aching slightly as she scrubbed applesauce from the collar of her sweater. A faint whiff of cinnamon clung to the fabric, paired with something unmistakably sour, likely from Riley's half-chewed strawberries she'd buried in the couch cushions. The twins had finally knocked out on the pull-out sofa, curled like puppies under the fleece blankets Pat kept just for them. The sun had long since dipped behind the skyline of downtown Cincinnati, streaking the apartment's walls with the last light of Saturday. Pat glanced at the clock. 6:58 p.m. Megan was already 3 minutes late. Again. The front door swung open without a knock, and Megan's voice breezed in first. "Hey, Mom. Sorry, traffic was nuts." Jason trailed behind her, phone in one hand, car keys in the other. He offered Pat a tired half-smile. "I don't know how you keep up with them. I'm exhausted just watching Megan parent." Pat didn't respond right away. She just kept scrubbing. Megan stepped over a trail of tiny socks and crushed goldfish crackers. Her heels clicked across the floor like punctuation. "We are so lucky to have free childcare every weekend," she said with a light laugh, tossing it out the way someone might comment on the weather. The dish towel stilled in Pat's hands. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Her ears rang with the echo of Megan's voice. Free childcare. The phrase hit her square in the chest. Not like a slap, but like the slow, cold press of something heavy and permanent. She heard Megan scoop up one of the twins, probably Kylie, the lighter sleeper, and kiss her forehead. Jason picked up a bag and muttered something about getting gas on the way home. And just like that, they were gone. The apartment fell into silence, save for the ticking of the microwave clock and the hum of the fridge. Pat stood there, dish towel clenched in her hand, applesauce crusted on her sweater, and a creeping hollowness spreading through her ribs. She walked slowly to the small dining table, sat down without removing her apron, and stared at the booster seat she kept strapped to the chair across from her. A bright yellow plastic fork rested beside it, uneaten macaroni hardening in the bowl. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She let it ring once. Twice. On the third, she got up and swiped it open. Linda. Still standing after babysitting boot camp? Pat stared at the message for a moment longer than necessary. Then she typed, "Pat. They called me free childcare." A pause. 3 dots danced on the screen. Linda. "Well, that sounds like a problem that needs billing rates." Pat didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, she moved back to the couch, picked up a crayon-streaked throw pillow, and tucked it under her knees. She leaned back, eyes fluttering closed for just a moment. But instead of rest, she saw flash after flash. Kylie dumping cereal on the floor at 7 a.m. Riley insisting on only the blue cup, then screaming when it spilled. Megan texting, "Can we drop them off early?" Without a question mark, Jason napping on Pat's couch last weekend while she bathed the girls they'd thanked her. Sometimes. But gratitude wasn't the same as respect. Not when Megan called it free childcare with a smile, like Pat was a subscription, not a person. She opened her eyes again, sharper now. Back at the table, she smoothed out a wrinkled paper napkin, clicked the pen from her apron pocket, and began scribbling numbers. Hours per weekend. Diaper changes. Meals cooked. Time spent soothing tantrums, cleaning up accidents, mending tiny shoes. She started writing faster. 14 months' worth of unpaid work. The microwave clicked. 7:43 p.m. Pat stood abruptly and walked to the bedroom. She opened the closet, reached for the top shelf, and pulled down a leather-bound notebook she hadn't touched since retirement. She laid it open on the bed, turned past the lesson plans and teaching rubrics, and found a blank page. With careful handwriting, she wrote at the top, "Hours worked. Megan's twins. Start date, July 10th last year." She paused, then underlined it. Twice. Outside, sirens passed on the street, but inside her apartment the only sound was the sharp, steady scratching of a pen across paper. She didn't know exactly what she was doing yet. Not fully. But she knew what she wasn't anymore. She wasn't free anything. Sunday morning came with gray skies and the smell of rain in the air. Pat stood at the small table near her kitchen window, steam rising from her coffee cup, the leather-bound notebook cracked open in front of her. A yellow highlighter and a fine-tipped black pen sat side by side, like surgical tools. She hadn't written this much since she retired, but the motion felt familiar. Her cursive, neat, disciplined, looping with purpose. She glanced at the clock. 7:12 a.m. If the twins had been here, she'd already be mopping juice from the floor or separating a squabble over whose turn it was with the blue crayon. Instead, there was only quiet. She picked up the pen and resumed her tally. Weekend 1, 16 hours. Weekend 2, 17.5 hours. Weekend 3, 19 hours, overnight. It went on and on. At first, she'd tried to be generous, rounding down, skipping half hours here and there. But after 30 pages, that generosity began to feel like a pattern she was finally ready to break. So she went back, adjusted the totals, and underlined them in ink. By noon, the numbers were staggering. Pat rubbed her temples and stood, stretching her legs. The ache in her back wasn't just from sitting. It was muscle memory from all the lifting, chasing, scrubbing, and bending she'd done every Saturday and Sunday for over a year. The knock on her door startled her. She opened it to find Linda standing there in a hoodie that read, "Boundaries are beautiful," holding a paper bag that smelled like onions and butter. "You're not cooking," Linda said by way of greeting, pushing past her. "You've earned a bagel the size of your self-restraint." Pat let out a short laugh and closed the door. "You're early." "I was nosy," Linda replied, setting the bag down and eyeing the open notebook. "So? How far back did you go?" "All the way," Pat said. She slid the notebook across the table. Linda skimmed a few pages, her eyebrows rising steadily. "Jesus, Pat, this is a payroll ledger. They owe you more than back pay. They owe you years." Pat poured them both coffee. "It's not about the money." Linda snorted. "No, it's about the disrespect. But putting a number on it? That gets people's attention." Pat sat again, flipping to a clean sheet of paper. She pulled out a calculator from her junk drawer and set it beside her coffee cup. "I'm trying to figure out what my time is worth." Linda leaned over her shoulder. "Okay, let's play businesswoman. Start low. What would a sitter charge? 14 an hour? Too generous." Pat looked at her. "It's Cincinnati, not Manhattan." "Still, you changed diapers, ran baths, taught colors, cooked, cleaned. You're not a sitter. You were a part-time parent." Linda sipped her coffee. "Call it 20. Pat hesitated, then typed it in. 138 hours, a 20 course. 20, that's 160, she blinked at the number. "Plus overtime," Linda added, "and holiday premiums, and emotional hazard pay." Pat laughed, but her throat tightened around it. "I raised a daughter who thinks I'm a free service." Linda's eyes softened. "You raised a daughter who got used to you always saying yes." Pat looked down at the number again. It didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like evidence. She opened her laptop. "What are you doing now?" "Typing it up," Pat said, her fingers already moving. "I'm done scribbling on napkins. If I'm going to value my time, I'm going to do it right. Linda grinned. God, I love when you get fired up. Pat worked in silence. The only sounds the clicking of keys and the soft patter of rain against the window. She created a table, labeled each row. Hourly rate, total hours, meals prepared, late pickups, overnights. She formatted the fonts, bolded the totals, adjusted spacing. It looked professional, unmistakably serious. She hit print. The printer whirred to life, and the first page rolled out crisp and final. Linda picked it up, whistled low. You gonna mail it to her? No, Pat said. Her voice was steady now. I'm going to hand it to her. Saturday morning arrived crisp and cloudless. The kind of early fall day that made Cincinnati feel like it was holding its breath before winter. Pat was dressed and ready by 8:30, hair pinned, blouse ironed, a single manila envelope resting on the entry table like a loaded trap. She didn't make pancakes today. No sippy cups waited on the counter. No coloring books were laid out in anticipation. The booster seat had been folded up and stashed in the closet. The knock came at 8:57 a.m., on time for once. Megan breezed in, talking over her shoulder. We'll be back around 5, maybe earlier if traffic isn't too crazy. She wore athleisure and sunglasses pushed up like a headband. Jason trailed behind, carrying both girls on either hip like duffel bags. Kylie was already whining about socks. Riley clutched a worn-out plush giraffe, thumb firmly planted in her mouth. Pat stepped aside to let them in but didn't move toward the girls. Megan blinked, taking in the quiet apartment. No snacks out yet? I won't be watching them today, Pat said evenly. Jason paused mid-squat, gently setting Riley down like he wasn't sure if this was a joke. What do you mean? Megan asked, laughing lightly. You've got your hands free. Don't tell me you have plans. I do. Pat reached for the manila envelope and held it out. But first, I want you to have this. Megan took it hesitantly, sunglasses still perched on her head. Okay? Jason hovered just behind her shoulder, brows slightly drawn. Megan slipped her thumb under the flap and pulled out the contents. Her eyes scanned the cover page, Pat's name at the top, followed by Childcare services, rate sheet and service policy, effective immediately. She laughed, short and confused. Wait, is this real? It's very real, Pat said, stepping back so the sunlight hit the envelope in Megan's hands. Jason blinked, mouth opening like he was about to say something, then thought better of it. Megan turned the page. Her jaw worked silently as she read down the columns. Hourly rate, $20. Overtime, $30 char. Meals provided, $5. Late pickup fee, $25 per 15-minute hours. It was comprehensive, professional, impeccably formatted. This is... Megan scoffed, shaking her head. Mom, this is absurd. You're joking, right? You weren't when you called me free childcare, Pat replied, voice steady, calm as lake water. I'm simply correcting the record. I didn't mean it like that, Megan said, her tone sharpening. It was a joke. No, Pat said. It was a truth disguised as convenience. Jason cleared his throat. I mean, maybe we could have said thank you more. But this? He motioned toward the papers. This feels a little... extreme. Pat looked at him for a long moment. You've sat on my couch with your shoes off while I bathed your daughters. You've eaten my food, left trash on my counters, and handed me screaming toddlers without so much as a heads up. And you never, not once, asked if I was okay with any of it. Jason looked away. Megan's face had hardened. We're family, Megan snapped. You don't invoice family. Pat folded her arms. You do when family treats you like staff. Riley tugged on Megan's leg, murmuring something about wanting juice. Kylie had begun fussing louder now, her voice climbing with impatience. The apartment's silence was cracking under the weight of their presence. "Are you seriously turning them away?" Megan asked, voice low with disbelief. "I am," Pat said. "Unless you'd like to schedule time as a paying client. But today, no appointment, no service." A long, uncomfortable silence settled between them. Megan slowly folded the rate sheet and slipped it back into the envelope. Her hands trembled just slightly. "This is how you want to play it?" she asked quietly. "No," Pat said. "This is how I stop pretending I'm not tired." Jason looked like he wanted to leave and vanish all at once. Megan turned, scooping up Riley. "Come on, girls. Grandma's closed today." As they shuffled out the door, Kylie began to cry, confused by the sudden exit, by the tension in the room that even a 4-year-old could taste. Pat didn't move. The door closed. She turned, exhaled, and looked down at the empty living room. Quiet again. Her phone buzzed a moment later. "Linda, did she explode or just fume?" Pat typed back, "Pat." She took the sheet. "Linda, she'll be back." Pat, "Not without a check." The first Saturday morning without the twins in over a year arrived like an exhale Pat hadn't realized she'd been holding. No squeals from the hallway, no sippy cups clattering in the sink. Just the slow rustle of her sheets and the soft patter of rain against the window. She stayed in bed until 9:17 a.m. It felt illegal. When she finally rose, the apartment was hushed and clean. She moved slowly, intentionally, pouring herself one perfect cup of coffee in the blue mug Megan always called too fragile for the kids. She sat by the window, wrapped in her robe, legs curled beneath her like a cat. A novel she'd abandoned 6 months ago sat open in her lap, its bookmark dusty, its characters frozen in time, just like she'd been. By 10:30 there was a knock. Linda, of course, breezed in with her usual lack of ceremony, balancing a bakery box and a smug grin. "To being officially off the books," she said, popping open the lid to reveal 2 massive bagels and a container of scallion cream cheese. Pat chuckled. "You really celebrate like it's a divorce party." Linda shrugged. "You finally left a toxic relationship, with unpaid labor. I call that liberation." They ate in the living room, sunlight warming the hardwood floors. Pat flipped through travel blogs on her laptop while Linda swirled her coffee and gossiped about the downstairs tenants. It felt decadent and unfamiliar. "You could go anywhere, you know," Linda said, nudging her foot. "Weekend in Asheville, hot springs in Michigan. Hell, even just a cabin an hour out." Pat looked up. "You think it's okay to leave the city?" "I think," Linda said slowly, "you've been on call every weekend like a surgeon for 2 toddlers. You're allowed to live." Pat smiled, but a tiny knot remained in her chest. She clicked open a tab and began browsing weekend train fares anyway. The piece lasted until mid-afternoon, when Linda burst into a cackle so sudden she nearly spilled her coffee. "Oh my God, you have to see this," she said, holding up her phone. "Tell me this isn't your daughter." Pat squinted at the screen. A screenshot of a local parenting group. The post read, "Emergency sitter needed for this weekend. Grandma flaked. Reliable backup recommendations? Preferably cheap." No names, but the phrasing was unmistakable. "She called you cheap and unreliable," Linda said, stunned. "That's a Hall of Fame combo." Pat felt her stomach twist, not with guilt but with something colder, something older. "She didn't flinch when I gave her the sheet," she murmured, "but now she's framing it like I bailed on them." Linda shook her head. "She's not ready to admit she lost control of you. So she's rewriting the story." Pat stared at the wall for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to her desk. She opened the drawer, pulled out the rate sheet, still clean, still official, and slid it into a new folder labeled Business. Then she picked up her phone and opened her Notes app. At the top, she wrote. Weekend getaway ideas. Asheville. Mountain views. Farmers market. Yellow Springs. Hiking trails. No grandkids. Chicago. Art. Jazz. Room service. She paused, then added a fourth bullet. Anywhere I don't have to clean up someone else's mess. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a name she didn't recognize. Sandy D. Hi, got your number from Maureen in the building. Heard you might be available for occasional weekend babysitting? My granddaughter's a handful, but we pay well and pick up on time. Interested? Pat blinked, then smiled. She started typing a reply. In the background, the apartment sat still, filled with the rare, humming silence of a life unclaimed by obligation. No diapers, no timeouts, no guilt. She looked toward the travel tab still open on her laptop. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to ask anyone's permission to go. The fluorescent lighting in the community rec center hummed faintly as Pat adjusted the straps on her tote bag and stepped into the multi-purpose room marked Childcare Certification Refresher. A folding table near the door offered clipboards, printed schedules, and a basket of mini muffins. It smelled like Lysol and cheap coffee, a far cry from the sticky chaos of her apartment after a twin invasion. Last name? The woman at the sign-in desk asked. Langston, Pat said, smoothing the collar of her shirt. Great. There's a seat up front. You'll get your updated CPR card by the end of the day. Thanks for taking the time to recertify. Pat nodded politely and made her way to a chair, glancing around. The room was filled with a mix of young nannies, weary dads, and a few older women like herself. Gray hair tied back, notepads ready, eyes alert. By noon, she'd been reminded how to properly handle a choking toddler and learned 2 new games for calming tantrums in public places. She found herself jotting notes she actually wanted to remember. It wasn't that she needed the certification to babysit, but now it felt like armor. When the session ended, she left with a small stack of handouts and a new idea buzzing behind her eyes. 2 days later, Linda arrived for their usual Tuesday morning coffee clutch. Except this time, Pat greeted her with a grin and a stack of printer paper. What's this? Linda asked, setting down a grocery tote filled with pastries. A side hustle, Pat said. I need your design eye. Linda shuffled through the stack. The first page was bold, bright, and simple. Weekend Nana Calm, qualified, cash only. CPR certified, 20+ years experience, flexible hours. Tired of saying yes every weekend? I can help. You're going to be a babysitter for grandparents? Linda said, half laughing, half in awe. Not a babysitter, Pat corrected. A professional backup. I love this woman, Linda whispered, hugging the paper dramatically. They worked for an hour adjusting the fonts, resizing the QR code that linked to a private booking calendar, and picking out a logo, an owl in reading glasses. That evening, Pat dropped a dozen flyers off at the rec center and the community board outside her apartment complex. She left one at the senior legal services office where Victor Darden occasionally volunteered. Another found its way onto the bulletin board at the grocery store next to a flyer for water aerobics and a missing cat. The first message came from a woman named Bernice, who'd been watching her great-granddaughter every Sunday since her daughter-in-law went back to work. I just need 1 weekend off, Bernice had typed. I love her, but I'm tired. Pat knew the feeling like a heartbeat. That Saturday, she arrived at Bernice's house 5 minutes early. By noon, she was reading a picture book to a sleepy toddler who'd only screamed once, and it had been about socks. When Bernice returned with a grateful smile and an envelope of crisp 20s, Pat took the money with steady hands and a heart oddly full. There was no guilt. No silent expectation. Just a job well done. That night, she texted Linda a picture of the envelope. Pat. First official payment. Feels better than I expected. Linda. Damn right it does. Pay back with interest. By the following week, 2 more bookings rolled in. Pat was considering whether she could handle more than one weekend a month when her phone lit up with Megan's name. She let it ring twice before answering. Hello? You're babysitting now? Megan's voice was sharp, brittle with disbelief. For strangers? Pat blinked. She hadn't expected her to find out so quickly. Not strangers, she said calmly. Clients. You've got time for other people's kids but not your own granddaughters? Megan, Pat said, setting down her tea. This isn't about time, it's about terms. There was a pause on the line, filled with static and the sound of Megan's breath shifting gears. So what? Megan snapped. You're done being their grandma now? I'm still their grandma, Pat said, but I'm not your fallback. The silence that followed was the longest yet. I see, Megan said flatly. Then the line went dead. Pat stared at her phone for a beat, then reached for the notebook where she tracked her hours and invoices. She opened a new page. At the top, she wrote, Boundaries held. October. Underneath, she wrote a single checkmark. And then she turned to the next page and wrote, for the first time, income goal, $500 a month. Pat tucked her glasses higher on her nose as she slid the freshly printed draft across the desk toward Victor Darden. They sat in a quiet office tucked inside the Senior Legal Services building downtown. A place with cheap carpet, flickering fluorescents, and the kind of solemn energy reserved for overdue wills and awkward estate disputes. But Pat didn't feel out of place here. Not anymore. Victor adjusted his cuff, scanning the document with the precision of someone used to reading between the lines. Hourly rate's solid, he said, tapping the page. You've got cancellation windows, no-shows, late pickup fees, and meal prep costs all covered. Clear. Fair. Professional. Pat nodded. I don't want this to sound like revenge, just policy. It reads like boundaries, Victor replied. And that's something people understand once they're made to. He set the document down and met her eyes. You sure you want to send it? Yes, Pat said, her voice quiet but without a flicker of hesitation. She doesn't get to pretend the past didn't happen. If she wants my time now, she can book it, with terms. Victor smiled, just the faintest one, and reached into his desk drawer. Then let's notarize it. 20 minutes later, Pat walked out of the office with 2 stamped copies. One went into her purse, the other into her file cabinet at home, labeled Langston Family Agreement, Care Services. She didn't tell Megan it was coming, just dropped it in the mail. First class. 3 days later, her phone buzzed while she was folding laundry. Megan. Again. Pat picked up on the second ring. What the hell is this? Megan snapped without a hello. A contract? With itemized charges? You actually sent me a legal document? It's a caregiver agreement, Pat said calmly. Most professionals use them. You're my mother, not a nanny agency. And I was your mother, Pat said evenly, when I showed up every Saturday with snacks, changed diapers, gave baths, and never asked for a dime. That was the relationship you wore out. Megan exhaled loudly into the phone. This is insane. Jason's voice filtered in from the background. Maybe we just pay her. Some. I mean, we were kind of assuming. There was a long pause, then Megan's voice again, cold and clipped. That's what parents do, not grandparents. Pat said nothing. Don't you want to spend time with them? Megan pressed. With your granddaughters? I do, Pat said, steady as a rail. But not on demand, and not at the expense of my health, time, or peace. Another silence. Pat had learned to sit through them now, let the quiet stretch until it did the talking. I'll need the signed agreement before I take them again, she added, just as Megan seemed ready to hang up. You're really serious about this, Megan muttered. I've never been clearer, Pat said, then ended the call herself, gently, without drama. That evening, she pulled the second copy from her filing cabinet and slid it into a new folder. She labeled it, Pending Signature, Langston Tarsh Wells. Her printer hummed to life again as she made one last backup. As the final page slid into the tray, Pat sat down with her tea and let the silence settle around her. The kind of silence that used to feel lonely but now felt earned. Her phone lit up with a message, this time from Jason. Jason. Hey, can we talk? Just us? Pat stared at the screen, weighing the ask. Not because she needed to be convinced, but because for the first time she had the power to say when and if. She didn't respond. Instead, she opened her planner to Saturday and drew a red X across the whole weekend. No kids, no bending, no guilt. The lawyer's pen clicked once, twice, then stilled. "You're sure about this?" she asked, glancing at Pat over the rim of her glasses. "Yes," Pat said, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I've never been more sure of anything." They sat in a tidy, wood-paneled office across town from Megan's suburb Neutral Ground. The same lawyer who had helped Pat and her late husband draft their estate plan over a decade ago now leaned over a stack of amended documents. Everything was being updated. Beneficiaries, distribution clauses, medical directives. But the key change, the one that mattered most, was in bold, boxed, and initialed. A restricted education trust for Kylie and Riley Langston Wells. The trust would be administered by a third party. Neither Megan nor Jason would have access. The funds were earmarked strictly for education, with zero exceptions. No family vacations disguised as enrichment. No new cars, for commuting to campus. No backdoor loans to bail out overspending. Just college. Plain and simple. Pat signed the bottom of the page, her signature slow and deliberate. Later that afternoon, Linda dropped by with a bottle of sparkling water and a grocery store cupcake. "You sign it?" she asked, flopping onto the couch like she owned the place. Pat handed her the fresh copy. Linda scanned it, eyebrows lifting. Damn. No fluff, no frills, just college tuition and ironclad locks on everything else. Pat poured 2 glasses of fizzy water and took a seat beside her. "They'll have a real chance at something. That's the only legacy I care about." Linda set the paper down carefully. "You really aren't leaving Megan or Jason anything?" Pat shrugged. "I'm not cutting them out. I'm just not guaranteeing them anything." "Life doesn't guarantee you gratitude." Linda raised her glass, to fair being mistaken for harsh. Pat tapped hers against it. "And to never funding entitlement again." The news hit a week later. It was a Saturday morning, and Pat was clipping a new plant, a snake plant named Rosie that Linda insisted helped with emotional air quality, when Megan showed up, unannounced. She didn't knock. Just walked in like she always had, the twins absent for once, her eyes stormy and restless. "I heard from the bank," she said. "You moved the trust." Pat didn't stop pruning. "I did. And we're not listed anymore, not even as secondary trustees." "That's correct." "So what, you're cutting us out now? Over a babysitting contract?" Pat finally turned. "No, I'm protecting the only people in this family who haven't asked anything of me." Megan stared, her breath shallow. "You'd rather give everything to 2 kids who don't even understand what you're doing for them?" "Yes," Pat said simply. "Because by the time they're old enough to understand, they'll have a chance at a future that wasn't built on someone else's exhaustion." Megan swallowed hard. Her voice wavered. "This isn't just about boundaries anymore. This is punishment." Pat stepped forward. "No, Megan, this is retirement from being taken for granted." That night, Pat sat at her dining table with a fresh notebook, the kind with thick pages and a faux leather cover, not for billing hours, not for tracking income. This one was personal. At the top of the first page, she wrote, "Time reclaimed. November Saturday, 8 a.m. Coffee, solo. 9 a.m. Plant trimming, 10:15 a.m. Call with old college friend, 11:30 a.m. Walk at Smale Riverfront Park, 1 p.m. No obligations. Felt like freedom." She smiled, capped her pen, and leaned back in her chair. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of her mini dishwasher and the soft jazz playing from her Bluetooth speaker. Her phone buzzed. "Jason, can we at least talk? I don't want to fight anymore." She let the message sit there on the screen, glowing in the dark like a missed opportunity. Then she opened her calendar and blocked off the next Sunday too. The knock came hard and fast, 3 sharp raps, the kind meant to signal urgency. Pat looked up from her crossword and checked the time. 10:42 a.m. Sunday. She already knew who it was before she opened the door. Megan stood outside, winded and clearly annoyed, her hair tied back in a messy bun, yoga pants streaked with something that looked like juice, or worse. She was pushing the double stroller with one hand and balancing a canvas diaper bag on the other shoulder like it weighed 100 pounds. Kylie was crying. Riley looked like she was seconds from joining her. "It's just an hour," Megan said breathlessly. "I have a parent and me orientation at the rec center. Jason forgot. I'm running late. Please. Just an hour." Pat didn't step aside. "You didn't schedule this," she said quietly. Megan blinked. "Are you really going to do this right now?" The twins both turned to look up at their grandmother, faces flushed and snotty. "I'm not doing anything," Pat said, her voice calm. "But you are." Megan's lips parted in disbelief. "You're seriously going to turn them away? Over a form?" "I'm not turning them away," Pat replied. "I'm turning you away." That landed like a slap. The air between them thickened as Megan straightened, outrage flickering behind her eyes. "Unbelievable. I can't believe this is who you've decided to be." Pat didn't answer. Behind her, Linda appeared in the hallway, arms folded, coffee mug in hand. "I told you the sign was too subtle." Megan's eyes darted past Pat. "Seriously? She's here?" "Yes," Linda said brightly. "And she's helping me alphabetize client files. You know, Pat's paying clients." Megan flushed. "You think this is funny?" "I think it's boundaries," Linda said. "You should try it." Riley had begun to whimper now, wriggling in her seat. Kylie kicked the front bar of the stroller. "Fine," Megan hissed. "This is what you want? To make a show out of refusing your own grandkids?" "This isn't a show," Pat said gently. "It's a consequence." For a moment, Megan just stood there, chest heaving, knuckles whitening on the stroller handle. She looked like she wanted to scream, or cry, or both. But she didn't. Instead, she gave one short, angry laugh and jerked the stroller back onto the sidewalk. "You'll regret this," she muttered, spinning the wheels with more force than necessary. "One day, you'll wish you said yes." Pat watched her walk away until the sound of the stroller wheels faded against the concrete. Linda stepped beside her and sipped her coffee. "She's gonna blow that parenting group sky high." "Let her," Pat said. "She can post all the half-truths she wants. I'm done giving the full story for free." They stood in silence for a long moment, watching a neighbor jog by, earbuds in, oblivious to the storm that had just passed on the porch. Then Linda tilted her head. "You still have that little label printer I gave you?" Pat smiled. "Top drawer." An hour later, a small laminated sign was taped to the inside of Pat's front window. Black font on white cardstock, clean and unmistakable. "Clients by appointment only, no walk-ins. No exceptions." Linda admired it with both hands on her hips. "Now that is energy I want in my life." Pat stepped back and looked at it through the glass, the reflection of the sign superimposed over her own face. She didn't feel cold, or cruel, or unkind. She felt safe. Back inside, she sat down at her desk and opened her calendar. She flipped past the coming weekend and into the next month. A few blocks were already filled in. One booking with Sandy D, another with a couple from the next complex over who'd seen her flyer. Then she drew a red X over Thanksgiving weekend. She didn't know yet what she'd do with it. Maybe a short trip. Maybe just a full weekend of rest. But she knew this much. She wouldn't be making stuffing while someone else napped on her couch. The coffee shop Megan chose was exactly what Pat expected. Too loud, too curated, too much reclaimed wood and overpriced seasonal lattes. A chalkboard sign by the register read, "Pumpkin spice is back, just like your bad decisions." And the irony was not lost on her. She spotted them in the corner booth. Jason sitting stiffly, Megan staring out the window like she wished she were anywhere else. Neither looked up when she approached, until she slid into the seat across from them with a plain black coffee and a worn manila folder. Jason spoke first, voice low and tired. "This is all really dramatic, Pat." Pat removed her gloves slowly, folding them once before setting them on the table. "Is it?" Megan turned toward her, eyes sharp. "We're family. You don't charge family." Pat didn't react. She just unfastened the flap of the folder and pulled out 3 sheets of paper, each covered in tightly organized rows and columns, color-coded, time-stamped. "I tracked every hour, every errand, every meal made and tantrum soothed. Every missed Saturday morning I didn't spend doing anything for myself." Jason glanced at the paper as Pat slid it across the table. "I didn't inflate anything," she said. "If anything, I lowballed the hours, because I knew you'd say this was too much." Megan didn't touch the paper. "I charge $20 an hour. That's below market rate for someone with my experience, and I never added emotional labor, or overnight rates, or the holidays you both forgot to pick them up on time." Jason's eyes stayed glued to the sheet now, scanning numbers that seemed to multiply by the second. Pat leaned forward. "It totaled out to less than minimum wage, for 14 months. Megan's jaw clenched. "You're making this feel transactional." "No," Pat said, voice steady. "You already made it that. I'm just assigning the math to it." For a long, tense moment, none of them said anything. The clatter of espresso cups and baristas shouting names filled the space between them. Then Jason spoke again. Quiet, sheepish. "We didn't think about it like that." "That much is obvious," Pat replied. Megan exhaled, slow and shallow. "So what? This is your way of punishing us?" "No," Pat said, softening slightly. "This is the only way I could get your attention without screaming." Jason picked up one of the sheets again and ran his finger along the totals. "You kept all of this." "I kept it," Pat said, "because no one else did." Megan reached for her drink but didn't sip it. Her eyes flicked to Jason, then back to Pat. "And what do you want now? A check?" Pat gave a small shake of her head. "I want acknowledgement." They stared at her. Jason's lips parted but no sound came out. Megan's expression flattened. "I don't need back pay," Pat continued. "But I'm not erasing the cost of what I gave. Not emotionally. And not in my estate planning." Megan's fingers tightened around the paper cup. "You mean the trust?" "I mean everything that comes next." Jason closed his eyes like he was doing math in his head. Or maybe grief. "We were overwhelmed. That first year with the twins was brutal." "I believe you," Pat said. "But you didn't ask for help. You expected it." No one replied. Pat took one final sip of her coffee, then slipped the papers back into the folder and stood. "I didn't come here to argue. I came so I wouldn't regret not saying it face to face." Megan's voice stopped her before she could turn away. "If you walk out now, does this just stay like this?" Pat looked down at them. No, it evolves. Like any relationship. Jason finally met her eyes. And if we sign the contract? Then we start fresh, Pat said, with clarity. She didn't wait for them to answer. Outside, the wind had picked up. Pat pulled her coat tighter and stepped off the curb, her boots clicking steadily against the sidewalk. Back at home, she opened her mailbox. Inside was a cream envelope with a return address she didn't recognize. Thick paper, hand-addressed. She opened it slowly. Inside, a check. Full payment. No note. But the name on the signature line wasn't Megan's. It was Jason's. The check sat untouched on Pat's kitchen table for 2 days. It was substantial. Not the full amount she'd calculated, but close enough to sting. Close enough to make a statement. The envelope had arrived with no note, no apology. Just Jason's clean, accountant-style signature at the bottom and a memo line that read simply, "Childcare reimbursement." Pat didn't cash it. Instead, she folded it neatly, slid it into the pocket of her leather planner, and went on with her week. On Thursday evening, she agreed to meet them again. This time at a neutral park bench by Eden Park's reflecting pool. Less curated than the coffee shop, fewer eavesdropping baristas. The autumn trees around them were starting to bronze at the edges. Jason looked sheepish. Megan looked like she was trying not to be there. "Did you get the check?" Jason asked. "I did," Pat said. A pause. She didn't elaborate. Jason cleared his throat. "We thought it might help. It's not everything, but it's a gesture," Megan cut in, "which is more than most people would offer." Pat studied them. Jason was trying. She could tell. His discomfort looked like effort. Megan's, meanwhile, looked like pride choking on itself. "I appreciate that," Pat said, "but I'm not cashing it." Jason blinked. "Why not?" "Because I never asked for money," she said. "I asked for acknowledgement." Megan made a sound halfway between a scoff and a sigh. "But isn't this what this was all about? The hours, the tracking, the rate sheet?" "No," Pat replied. "Those were tools, because words weren't working." Jason looked down at his hands. Megan crossed her arms. "We thought the check was, I don't know, fair," Jason offered, voice cautious. "Do you?" Pat asked. "What number would you assign to missing your own Saturday mornings for over a year? Or cooking for 4 while eating cold leftovers alone at the end of the day?" Megan flinched. Just slightly. "It's not about the dollars," Pat continued. "But once you labeled me free childcare, you turned it into a transaction. I'm just giving it the paperwork it deserves." Megan muttered, "We're still your family." "Yes," Pat said. "And you still are. That's what makes this harder. But if I'm going to be part of your village, then I need to be treated like a person in it, not a utility." Jason rubbed the back of his neck. "What would make this right then?" Pat opened her planner, took out the check, and held it up. Then she ripped it cleanly in half, her fingers steady. Megan gasped. "Oh my God, Mom, that was real money." "It was silence money," Pat interrupted. "And I'm not interested in being bought off." Jason looked stunned. Megan flushed deep red, her jaw locked. "We wanted to meet in the middle," Jason said, voice quieter now. Pat stood. "You're confusing a compromise with a cop-out." She tucked the torn halves into her coat pocket and looked out over the water. "I don't need a financial apology. I need the two of you to recognize that you depended on me too much and valued me too little." Neither of them spoke. The breeze picked up, rustling leaves across the pavement like reminders. Pat turned back to them. "If you're ready to respect my time, my space, and the life I've reclaimed, then we can rebuild. But it starts with boundaries, not band-aids." Without waiting for a reply, she walked back to her car. That night, Linda came over with 2 bottles of wine, one red, one white. and a bag of kettle chips. Celebrating anything in particular or just the general joy of giving zero damns? She asked. Pat handed her a glass and clinked it with her own. I turned down a payoff today. Linda raised her eyebrows. Ooh, that calls for the fancy glasses. They laughed, deep, belly deep, until their cheeks ached and the wine was half gone. As they cleaned up, Pat opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small framed quote she'd once buried in a pile of old papers. She set it on the shelf by her entryway. People treat you how you allow them to. And beneath it, she tucked the ripped check, pressed flat like a pressed leaf. The folding chairs were already full when Pat stepped into the rec center's community room. A line of grandparents snaked down the hallway, soft murmurs blending with the hum of vending machines and the muffled thump of a kid's Zumba class next door. Inside, the air buzzed, not with chaos, but with anticipation. She hadn't expected this kind of turnout. What had started as a casual idea during wine night with Linda. You should teach a class or something, Pat. Lord knows you've got the syllabus already written. Had turned into a flyer on every bulletin board within walking distance of downtown. Boundaries and burnout, reclaiming time without guilt, a free workshop for grandparents. Now, standing room only. Linda stood at the front, hands on her hips, clearly loving every second of it. All right, settle down, my friends. I want to introduce the woman who taught me how to say no without apologizing. She smiled at Pat. A recovering pushover, a boundary badass, and frankly, the best damn former teacher Cincinnati ever had. Scattered applause broke out. A few people chuckled. One woman near the back clapped with both hands over her head like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to give her permission. Pat smiled politely and stepped forward, clutching a manila folder filled with notes she knew she wouldn't need. Hi, she said, letting the room settle around her. I'm Pat Langston. I'm a grandmother, a retired teacher, and, until recently, a cautionary tale. The crowd leaned in. She didn't use names. She didn't need to. Instead, she spoke in lived truths about how easy it is to become the default, the unspoken yes, the ever available. About how being helpful turns into being invisible. How they forget to thank you, and you forget to mind. She shared about the nap she hadn't taken in 14 months, about missing book club, about eating dinner alone while someone else called her a lifesaver and then never showed up on time. She showed the spreadsheet, projected onto a screen behind her. Rows of unpaid hours, columns labeled tantrum recovery, unscheduled pickups, meals cooked. She made them laugh. She made them quiet. When she got to the part about the rate sheet, someone in the second row muttered, "Damn right," and another whispered, "Wish I had the guts." Pat looked at them and said, "It wasn't guts. It was survival. Because if I didn't name my worth, no one else was going to." The room exhaled in collective recognition. By the end, people were hugging her. One man asked for a copy of the contract template. Another woman said, "My daughter-in-law's going to hate that I was here. Can I bring her next time?" Linda handed out tissues and sign-up forms for the next session like it was a party. Pat stepped outside into the crisp November air, more tired than she'd been in weeks. But it was the good kind. The kind that follows clarity. Megan found out that evening. It started with a ping. Tasha, coworker. "Hey, just saw your mom's workshop thing shared in my parenting group. Kinda wild. Didn't know she was the spreadsheet grandma." Then another. Amanda from Pilates. "OMG, is this your mom? This woman is going viral in our senior moms group. Respect, but yikes." And then a third, from someone Megan didn't even know well. "This Pat lady sounds iconic. Bet her kids are mortified though." Megan's thumb hovered over the keyboard for a long time. Her cheeks burned. She opened Instagram, tapped News Story, and snapped a photo of a pair of glittery toddler sneakers sitting beside her front door. Over it, she typed, "Family shouldn't need contracts," then added a neutral beige heart emoji for good measure. She watched the views roll in, her curated audience quietly witnessing her side of things without hearing a word of Pat's. Across town, Pat saw the post a few hours later. She didn't reply. She just screenshotted it, saved it in a folder labeled Narratives I Didn't Approve, and added a sticky note to her desk. Lesson plan. Future session on guilt trips. Victor flipped the final page of the trust documents and slid them gently across the polished surface of his desk. "Sign here," he said, tapping the line with a silver Montblanc pen, and it's ironclad. Pat took a breath, not out of doubt, but out of the sheer gravity of the moment. Then she signed her name in slow, deliberate cursive, the way she used to teach her students when penmanship still mattered. Patricia L. Langston. The paper fluttered slightly under her wrist, but her hand never wavered. When she was finished, Victor turned the document toward himself and added his signature beneath hers. Then he reached for the embossed notary seal. Click. Press. Release. A permanent mark. "It's done," he said simply. "The trust is locked, fully administered by Third Shore Financial. No one, not your daughter, not Jason, not even their tax attorney, can touch a dime of it unless it's directly related to the twins' education." "Good," Pat said. Her voice didn't shake. Not anymore. Victor smiled. "You just gave your granddaughter something that can't be rewritten in a social media post." She nodded, more relieved than triumphant. That was the point. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "You know, you've done more in 6 months than most families accomplish in a decade of therapy." Pat gave a dry laugh. "I didn't need therapy. I needed a ledger." When she got home, Linda was already on her stoop with a paper bag full of warm empanadas and a grin that said "Spill everything." "Victor said it's finalized," Pat announced, unlocking the door. Linda nearly dropped the bag. "Are we officially free of whiny adult children trying to monetize your kindness?" Pat held the door open and gestured dramatically. "Welcome to the era of the untouchable trust." Inside, Linda handed her a bottle of sparkling elderflower soda and raised it like a champagne toast. "You just wrote your own retirement script." "To college tuition," Pat replied, clinking her glass, "and to never again funding someone else's chaos." They ate at the kitchen counter, where the afternoon light spilled in soft and golden across the tile. The apartment felt different. Lighter somehow, like even the walls had exhaled. After lunch, Pat walked to her desk and opened the bottom drawer. She pulled out the rate sheet, the one she'd printed months ago, back when it was just a quiet form of resistance. She smoothed it flat on the desk. It was still sharp, still precise. Then she reached for a simple black frame. Linda looked up from her drink. "You're framing it?" "It's my first declaration of value," Pat said. "Might as well treat it like art." She hung it on the wall above her desk, just beside the calendar where she'd once penciled in pickups and snack times. Now it held nothing but client bookings and clean white space. They stood in silence, admiring it like a painting. "Looks expensive?" Linda whispered. "Good," Pat replied. That night, Megan called. Pat let it go to voicemail. Then came a text. "Can we at least talk about the trust?" Pat didn't reply. Not because she was being cruel, but because she'd already said everything that needed saying. In contracts, in policies, in ledgers and laminated signs. The conversation had shifted. Permanently. The next day, she got a call from the financial firm managing the trust. "Hi, Ms. Langston," the young rep said carefully. "We had a request from a Megan Langston Wells asking to view the account. We, of course, denied access. Just thought you'd want to know." Pat smiled gently. "Thank you for the call. That won't be necessary again. She hung up and wrote the date in her notebook. First attempt to circumvent terms, blocked. That evening, she walked into her bedroom and noticed the soft rustle of wind through the cracked window. Autumn was finishing its work, the trees nearly bare, the air crisp with certainty. She reached for her notebook, flipped to the last page, and scribbled down one line in ink. They can manage their image. I'll manage my peace. The text came on a Thursday afternoon. Megan, just a walk? No talk about money or trust stuff. Just neutral ground. Pat stared at it, her tea cooling beside her. She didn't reply. Not that day. Not the next. Not even the day after. She gave it space. Gave herself space. She let the need in the message marinate a little. Let Megan sit with the kind of unanswered ask Pat had once swallowed every weekend. 7 days later, she replied. Pat. Saturday. Eden Park. 9 a.m. Dress for wind. The park was quieter this time, the last of the fall leaves tumbling across the paths in spirals. A few runners passed by in fleece jackets, and someone had scattered cracked corn near the pond for the ducks. Pat waited by the iron railing, gloved hands tucked into the pockets of her peacoat. She could hear the distant hum of city traffic, muted beneath the rustle of bare branches. Megan arrived on time. She looked tired in a way that didn't come from kids or lack of sleep, but from holding a position too long. She offered a tentative smile, the kind that asked permission without words. Pat gave a small nod and started walking. For the first 5 minutes, they didn't speak. They moved at the same pace, not quite in step but not fighting against each other either. Just two women walking the edge of a long silence. Eventually, Megan broke it. I didn't realize how much I leaned on you, she said. Pat said nothing. Megan glanced sideways. I mean, I thought I knew, but I didn't feel it until it stopped. Still, Pat said nothing. They passed a bench where a young dad was blowing bubbles while his toddler squealed in delight. Megan watched them a moment too long. Jason's been quiet, she added. Not angry, just reflective. Which is honestly more unsettling. Pat raised an eyebrow but didn't take the bait. Another pause. Then Megan exhaled. Slower this time. I don't expect you to say yes anymore, she said. Not automatically, not out of guilt. I'm not asking for that. That made Pat stop walking. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her. Megan's cheeks were pink from the cold, her posture unsure, her voice carrying no defensiveness for once, and in that stillness, something shifted. Not dramatically, but undeniably. That, Pat said, is the first thing you've said that sounds like respect. Megan nodded. I meant it that way. They stood there in the breeze, surrounded by wind and duck feathers and the muffled chatter of strangers. I didn't come to ask for favors, Megan said. I missed walking with you. That caught Pat off guard, not in a manipulative way, but in a quiet, old memory way. They had walked often, once. Around the block when Megan was little, at the zoo with the twins before everything got heavy, through grocery store aisles, arguing over snack brands and bedtime routines. Pat turned, resumed the walk, and Megan followed. They didn't speak for another 10 minutes. It was better that way. As they approached the parking lot, Megan slowed. I still think about that sign you hung up, she said. Clients by appointment only. Pat didn't smile. It's still there. I figured. Megan tucked her hands into her sleeves. But I think I finally understand who it was meant for. Pat gave a small nod. It wasn't about strangers. Megan looked like she might cry, but she didn't. She simply nodded and turned to go. I won't text you, she said. Not unless it's a question you're allowed to say no to. Pat didn't reply, but that, finally, felt okay. That night, Pat returned to her notebook. She flipped past pages labeled Time Reclaimed and Client Hours Logged, past sticky notes and contract copies and one stubborn printout of the rate sheet with a coffee ring on the corner. She opened to a new page and wrote, November 18th, first sign of real change. Not a promise, but a pause. And sometimes, that's the part people rush past. She closed the notebook, placed it beside her teacup, and turned out the light. The porch outside remained still, but her door stayed locked, not as a barrier, but as a choice. Pat arrived 5 minutes early, not because she had to, but because she'd agreed to. That distinction mattered. It was the first Saturday she'd scheduled in months for Megan, and it was written clearly in her calendar. Langston Wells Twins, 12 to 4 p.m., prepaid. Just one afternoon, boundaried, booked, balanced. She knocked once, firmly, then stepped back from the door. She didn't want to walk in like old times. That wasn't the agreement. Megan answered with a kind of quiet efficiency that mirrored Pat's own. No lingering awkwardness, no eager small talk, just a clear nod and a paper envelope passed, hand to hand. For today, Megan said simply. Thank you, Pat replied, slipping it into her bag without opening it. Then came the sound Pat hadn't realized she'd missed so much, tiny feet thudding across hardwood, followed by squeals of delight. Grandma Pat! The twins launched at her like twin rockets, their coats half-zipped, cheeks flushed, hair wild. Riley had a toy stethoscope around her neck. Kylie clutched a crayon-streaked drawing of what looked like a giraffe standing on a pizza. Pat crouched just enough to meet them at eye level, hugging them with a careful balance of warmth and restraint. 4 hours, she reminded herself. 4 hours of joy, on her terms. Ready for your big afternoon? She asked. They nodded furiously. Megan handed over a tote bag with snacks and spare socks. Call if you need anything, she said, voice quiet. I won't, Pat replied, gently but firmly. Then she turned and led the twins down the driveway, one small hand in each of hers. The park near Pat's apartment was drenched in sunshine, rare for late November. The girls took turns on the swing set while Pat sipped her coffee from a thermos. She sat on a bench positioned perfectly in the sun, watching them laugh like nothing had ever gone sideways, and in that moment she felt it again, what it meant to show up by choice, not obligation. Around 2:30, Linda strolled up the path with her usual flair, balancing a tin of oatmeal cookies like a prize. Well, don't you look disgustingly peaceful? She said, handing over the tin with a wink. 3 hours in and no meltdowns, Pat said. I should bill extra for that. Linda nodded toward the twins. They look happy. They are, Pat said. Kids don't hold grudges. They just remember who shows up with snacks. Linda settled beside her on the bench. And you? You look lighter. Pat didn't answer right away. She just closed her eyes for a beat and let the sun warm her cheeks. It's different now, she said eventually. Clean. No guilt tangled in the joy. Linda pulled a cookie from the tin and took a bite. That's what happens when you stop selling pieces of yourself at a discount. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the girls laugh and yell and tumble through the leaves. I saw Megan's car pull away earlier, Linda said casually. She didn't hang around this time. Pat smiled without looking over. She dropped off. Didn't linger. Didn't test the boundaries. Just honored the agreement. Linda nudged her gently. You taught her more than you know. Pat watched Kylie point dramatically at a squirrel like she was issuing a formal accusation. Riley immediately followed suit. They're going to remember me, she said, but not as the woman who gave everything without question. Linda raised her cookie. To the new version of Grandma. To the paid version, Pat said, clinking her thermos against Linda's cookie like it was champagne. At exactly 4 p.m., Megan pulled up to the curb, engine running. She stepped out and waved but didn't approach. Pat kissed each twin on the head, handed them off with practiced ease, and walked back toward her apartment without waiting for a lingering thank you. Later that night, she sat at her desk and opened her client log. Nov 25, Langston Wells, Session Number 1, paid in full. Calm, clean, clear. She made a small note beside it. Relationship, reclassified. Then she opened a fresh invoice folder, labeled it simply, Family, with terms. The room at the rec center looked different now. Not just fuller, though it was, but more awake, more present. It was Pat's third month teaching her new workshop. Senior boundaries, time, worth, and saying no without apology. What started with a few folding chairs and a stack of handouts had turned into a wait list, laminated name tags, and a standing ovation the month prior. Today's flyer, printed on cream cardstock with forest green lettering, read, "Experience matters. So does your time." A practical class for grandparents, caretakers, and the chronically over-volunteered. Pat stood at the front of the room, wearing a soft gray cardigan and the quiet command she'd once reserved for third-grade spelling tests and parent-teacher conferences. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation. "Where did your weekend go?" And then she asked her favorite opening question. "How many of you said yes last week when you wanted to say no?" More than half the hands went up. A few heads dropped. Some laughed uncomfortably. Pat nodded as if she already knew. She moved through the slides, billing language, negotiation tips, scripts for saying not today. But the part everyone leaned in for, every time, came near the end. Her story. "I started tracking my time because I felt like I was disappearing," she told them. "I wasn't angry at first. I was tired. Then I was tired of being tired. So I built a system, a rate sheet, a policy, a life that didn't require silent suffering." She didn't use names. She never had to. People saw their own daughters, sons, neighbors, churches, and in-laws in her words. The session ended in applause. A woman in the front row mouthed, "Thank you." Pat smiled and began packing up. Back home, she placed her notes in a labeled binder and moved to her desk, where her calendar was neatly blocked out. Workshop dates, client appointments, 2 weekends off just for herself. The framed rate sheet still hung above the desk. Just beneath it, a new addition, a clean white plaque that read, "No" is a full sentence. She reached for her planner, flipping to the current weekend. In neat ink, it read, "Langston Wells visit, 1 p.m., 4 p.m." The doorbell rang at exactly 1 hung. Pat opened the door to see Megan standing tall, her coat zipped, her posture easy but not casual. She didn't step inside. She didn't try to. Instead, she gave a respectful smile. "Hi, Mom." Jason stood just behind her, holding the diaper bag in one hand and a book in the other. "Goodnight, Moon, well-loved and dog-eared." "Girls are excited," he said. "We packed snacks and backup socks." Pat nodded. "Thanks." Megan handed over an envelope without a word. No jokes, no hesitations. Inside, Pat already knew, was the agreed payment. Plus, likely, a thank you card Riley had insisted on coloring. There was one last glance exchanged before they turned back toward the car. No drama, no second guessing. Pat shut the door and walked into the living room where Kylie and Riley were already setting up a tea party with unmatched cups and an old stuffed dog wearing sunglasses. "Grandma," Riley whispered urgently, "the bear needs juice or he's gonna be grumpy." Pat knelt down and poured imaginary tea into the tiniest cup. "Then we better not keep him waiting." They played until 4 then cleaned up together. At pickup, Megan was early and waited outside until Pat opened the door. "Thank you," she said quietly. "See you next month." Jason gave a little wave. "Have a good rest of your day." Pat watched them buckle the girls into the car, then turned and closed the door behind her. She didn't sigh. She didn't sit down immediately. Instead, she walked to her desk and logged the visit. December 9th, Langston Wells session, Sir 2. Paid in full, joyful, respected. She filed the envelope in her cabinet, the receipt in her ledger, and the little thank you drawing on the fridge. Then she brewed a fresh pot of tea, picked up the novel she'd been chipping away at for 3 weeks, and settled into her favorite chair. The sun slipped quietly across the hardwood, warming her feet. No one would be knocking. No last-minute calls. No guilt pressing against the walls of her apartment. Just her tea, and the soft ticking of the clock she now let run on her time. They called me free childcare. I called myself done.